And the moment Africa starts designing its own destiny, you start getting punished, and people and leaders have gotten killed as a result of that. Now, the question that lies here is that, is it reasonable to continue asking for our gold back, the gold that was stolen ages ago? Now, if you ask me this question, I would say, well, Africa as a continent does not even come close to who owns the most gold today in 2025. So in this episode, we're going to talk about bling, gold and gold. Well, we know wherever you see gold, people associate that with money. The gold blings and the gold chains. So gold is the original magnet for power. It glitters, it lures, it headlines every economic panic. It's been used since the Bible days of Jesus. The pharaohs in the Bible days wore it as a divine proof. And yet bankers today call it old-fashioned simply because it doesn't fit their day-to-day profit engine. And yet they still want to lock it up. They still want to have it in their vaults just in case things get rough. This is how big of a deal this gold is. Gold has sent countless miners, young and old, into early graves. So it's quite a big shame. So we all know that people have dug for many metals since the cave times, but gold has always stood out. It's so prized that we still lock it inside today's high security vaults. So in this video, I will talk about who really owns the gold in the entire world. And you'll be surprised to learn that Africa as a continent does not even come close to who owns the most gold today in 2025. I'll discuss why Africa, for many years, has always been chased and targeted for gold, and yet other countries hold mountains of this stuff. So without wasting time, let's talk numbers and explore the real heavyweight champs of gold mining. Number one, we have China that produces 380 tons every single year. That's nearly $35 billion yearly. Number two, we've got Russia that produces about 320 tons, whopping $28 billion. We've got Australia that produces 290 tons, making over $27 billion. We've got Canada producing 200 tons, making $19 billion every single year. We've got the United States of America that produces 160 tons of gold, and they make about $15 billion every single year. Now, all of these countries I've just mentioned combined produce over 1,340 tons of gold with a monetary value of about $140 billion every single year. Okay, so let that stick in mind. $140 billion every single year for the 5 countries that I've just mentioned: China, Russia, Australia, Canada, and the United States. Yet, most of these countries are still hungry for Africa's gold. Does that make sense? Now, before I dive into the actual numbers of how much gold is being produced in Africa, would it surprise you to learn that Africa only produces a combined total of less than 700 tons of gold every year, which is half of what China, Russia, Australia, Canada, and the United States produces. So in total, Africa makes only $45 billion in raw value per year. Yet barely a fraction of that African wealth ever reaches African families. So to put it into perspective, did you know that the Fort Knox, the heavily guarded vault that stores much of America's gold, guards 4,500 tons? That's more gold than Ghana has ever mined in its entire modern history. And yet Ghana is the number 1 producer of gold in Africa. So the story clearly isn't about possession. It's about access. It's about influence. With Africa having a deficit of more than $100 billion compared to other nations when it comes to gold production, is just ridiculous. In fact, it's not just ridiculous. This is scandalous, my people. So today, Africa's scorecard reads: Ghana, 130 tons. South Africa, 100 tons. So we've got Sudan, Mali, Burkina Faso, Tanzania, Cote d'Ivoire together producing 450 tons of gold or more. Now, this list is not exhaustive because we've got other smaller countries that produce gold as well. But roughly, if we look at Africa, they produce over $45 billion every year. So why do the headlines act as if Africa is the world's only glittering treasure chest? Okay, the story. So this thing that Africa has with a lot more gold is rich in gold. This is just a myth. It's just a myth that needs setting straight, because Africa does not even come close. So it makes you wonder, is this a deliberate narrative by the West to shift focus from them and justify the means to keep digging gold from our motherland? It's very suspicious that they seem to have a lot of gold and we have this much gold, and suddenly everybody wants about gold, which is less, which is very shameful. So picture gold like coffee beans, okay? The world favors whichever farm sells cheap beans fastest. This is how just business works. So Africa's attraction is cost, nothing but cost. So I think what attracts a lot of these mining companies is the cheap labor. Geology is so rich. That's the most important thing. Regulations can be flexible in Africa. A polite word for loopholes. Add political volatility and you get negotiators who accept pennies on the dollar in exchange for stability packages. And we've seen this play out just recently with Donald Trump in the Oval Office, where they reached a deal between the Rwanda and Congo conflict, and the United States suddenly had access to the minerals of the Congo. So we don't really know, even though the terms are there for people to see, but we were not there. So we don't really know what else and what clauses that package has to the people of Congo, and at what expense Africa will have to pay as a result of that. So that we're yet to see, and we're yet to see how that is going to. So the other thing is it's economics, the turbocharged geopolitics. If the Western companies know very well that if you run a gold mine, you get more than metal, okay? And the West knows how to play this game very well. They know running a gold mine in Africa not only gains you political power, it gains you control over trade routes and even a ready excuse to bring in soldiers for security. Look at the United Nations. Look at how many people we've had, the soldiers that have come into the countries, and people have never left. And that is why Ibrahim Traore kicked out the French troops. Okay, he had the courage, the boldness to kick out all these people, because otherwise they'll just be there, just doing nothing and hoping that they should continue looting the gold and other minerals. Okay, so that is why gold-rich land becomes a chessboard. The big players move their pieces and ordinary people get caught in the game, confused, not knowing what to do, and just play the yes buana card, or yes, your yes, this, we can do that, because you've got no idea. You've got no idea what you want to do with that gold. We're going to look at the double standard playbook, okay? So we all know the gold field has not played equally. This is one of the reasons why African countries and African governments have always said the playing game is never fair. Okay, so here's how the cycle usually plays out step by step. Number one, so the African countries often get advice. Okay, Africa should keep more profit. We should refine the gold at home. They're encouraged, and it's all on paper. Okay, do this, do that, or big speeches. Africa should refine and do this. We are ready to support Africa in that sense. And number two, once an African country does exactly that and build its own refinery, it becomes an issue. Okay, once the African countries, which we've seen recently in Mali or in Burkina Faso, once they take that call of action, they suddenly some kind of backlash. Okay, the backlash comes in all sorts of ways. You can't even guess. The credit rating agencies start saying, "Oh, there's too much government interference," and they'll start downgrading the country's score. And we've seen it. Suddenly with our famous brother, General Langley, suddenly accused Burkina Faso of hiding behind the gold just because Ibrahim Traore suddenly started doing the right thing with the resources, which is to develop the roads, to build infrastructure, to fund tech startups, and many more. And this suddenly became an issue. Okay. And the result of that now is that these big gold buyers, they quietly either shift their orders to a neighboring country, or they start threatening sanctions, or they even start threatening war to that particular country. So the rules always flip. The moment Africa follows the rule book, everything just goes haywire. Funny, absolutely funny stuff. So we've seen even with the so-called giants, they still go through challenges, the likes of America, Russia, Canada. There are all sorts of things that they can go through. But the only problem is when Africa goes through similar problems, they're not really labeled as issues. I'll give you some examples here. So when wildfires close pits in Australia, okay, so we've seen a situation where wildfires have closed pits in Australia, sanctions, like recently they've choked Russia. Russia is not able to trade in gold because of the sanctions that have been slapped on it. The strikes have halted the Nevada shafts. The proof that no vote is fireproof. Anything can happen. But then that brings us back to Africa. Risk is everywhere. But the story isn't told evenly. That's where the problem is. When trouble hits the West, it's called a hiccup. Okay? But when it hits Africa, it's labeled a crisis. There's always going to be ways of explaining issues that happen in the West. There's always going to be a way of explaining them. Oh, the reason why Russia is not doing so well is probably because of the sanctions. Or in Nevada, it's because of the strikes that happened in America. It's because of this and that. But when it happens in Africa, it's always reported negatively. And this is just so wrong. So in other words, Africa's dangers get amplified whilst its potential gets played down. By design. And all this is by design. So imagine if the whole African mining system could adopt a roadmap that is fair between the African governments and the West. That would be so much beneficial, not just for the people. It would be beneficial to the mining sector itself, and it would add value. So say, for instance, particularly what we are really expected to do is to achieve all of these things without facing the consequences, because the moment we start moving forward, the moment the African leaders like Ibrahim Traore start moving forwards and they start getting threatened by the S word, which we all know what S word is, it's the sanctions. The price of extraction. Gold is never free. That shiny ring on the billionaire's finger might carry the poison a village child breathed while burning mercury to separate gold. We've seen all sorts of negativities that can happen with the gold. It doesn't have to stay this way. There's always ways that the government can always come in to intervene and make things straight. For example, simple things like safer washing methods. The simple water and gravity setups can pull out the gold without mercury or cyanide. Okay, but again, we get governments that are too weak on policy or have weak institutions that have got no enforceable criteria to enforce such simple steps that can make mining safe. For example, another example would be the proof of origin tags that let any buyer see exactly where each bar came from. And step number 3 would be to trade it. Use the new African Continental Free Trade Area to move gold bars tariff-free from within African countries. Say, for example, if gold bars are moving from Ghana to Rwanda, or from Rwanda to Egypt, from Egypt to Lusaka, these have to move with a tariff-free from within, from one country to the next. But the amount of bureaucracy, the amount of tariffs within the African countries that this gold moves by, you'll be astonished. So number 4, go digital. Create a Pan-African currency, each unit backed by real gold bars locked in our own vaults. And this is the vision that Muammar Gaddafi had. His vision was to back the real currency, put real currency, and trade the gold bars as real currency. And this is what got him into trouble. And this is a move that was deadly, a move that caused his downfall, and a move that even cost his life, unfortunately. Okay. So given what real ownership could look like in Africa as a whole, what we are really expected to do is to achieve all these things without facing consequences, because the moment, like we say, the moment African countries start taking ownership, as we've seen in the story of Burkina Faso, they start threatening you with the S word, and we all know that what that S word is: sanctions. Okay, from the West. But then, as Africans, are we justified to continue blaming the West for the colonial loot? We know that gold was looted. We know that this is what happened in the colonial era. Gold was taken out from African countries. But the question that I have for you folks is that, is it reasonable to continue to ask for our gold back? Because this is a narrative that doesn't seem to go away. What progress is being made to try and get this gold back? So if you ask me this question as, do we really need the gold back? I would say currently, honestly, it's not really worth it. And before you shoot me, stick with me and I'll explain why. So there's no doubt that the colonial era looting certainly drained a lot of gold from Africa and set up an export-first mining model. But that isn't the main reason. I don't believe that's the main reason why China, Australia, Russia outproduced the continent today. I don't think that's the reason why. Yes, the looting was there, and it's such a sad thing that happened during that time. If we have to look on the positive side of things, is we have to look at the fact that Africa still holds an estimated 40% of the world's remaining gold resources. Now think of it. 40% is near enough 50%. So we've got half of the gold still remains in Africa today. We've got the other half that is split all across the West, China, you name it, and all of those 5 countries that I did mention. So the gap in annual output is driven far more by geology. It's driven far more by technology, investment, and governance than by pure depletion. So how much did colonial mining really take? So if we go back and look at the 19th and the early 20th century, the colonial firms did remove vast amounts. There's no doubt about that. South Africa alone provided roughly 1/3 of all gold ever extracted. The French and the British companies carved out hundreds of square kilometers of concessions from Mali to Ghana, locking local people out of their own land. That was heartless. It's painful. It's very, very painful until today. But if we focus on the scale, humans have mined about 216,000 tons of gold in all of history, okay, which is a lot of gold that has been mined by humans. Now, the annual global output now hovers around 3,100 tons. That is for the entire globe. If every colonial ounce had stayed underground, modern technology would still make China, Australia, Russia hard to beat today because their newer deposits are cheaper to reach. Okay, the real bottlenecks are for Africa mainly that are bringing the mining sector down is the depth and the depletion. So South Africa's easy ore is gone. It used to be easy now to reach the South African ore, but now the rest of the gold that is remaining, particularly in South Africa, we are talking of about 2 miles down. So how do we get to that gold? Well, have they got the right technology? Have they got the right machinery? Have they got the right methods to go after that gold that is 2 miles down? You see, so one good example I can give is the Witwatersrand Reef. It once yielded half the gold ever mined, but the remaining ore now lies 3 to 4 kilometers deep, making each ounce costly and risky. Whereas on the other hand, we've got China, we've got Australia that are still finding shallower and cheaper deposits discovered only in the 1980s and 2000. And not only that, they've got the right technology, they've got the right money, they've got the right resources, they've got everything at their disposal to flip that gold. The other bottleneck for Africa has been financing. These big long life mines need stable 15 to 20 year investment horizons, which is lacking in most of these deals that's happening between the governments. Infrastructure is always going to be a big issue when it comes to mines. Power, water, the rail gaps, and policy flip-flops. sudden tax hikes or license reviews. The other concern is the processing capacity, because only a handful of the refineries exist. So the raw gold still ships out because of the lack of the resources to turn this gold into revenue. So it's easier to ship it out, and they'll deal with it over the other side, and at least we'll get something than lose everything. So, is the Africa was emptied story wrong? The colonial and early post-colonial extraction did strip wealth. It also left environmental scars and royal systems that still lack value. But Africa's lower output today is less about nothing left. It's not because the reason why Africa is where it is today is not because of the gold that was stolen. It's got nothing to do with that. Okay, I think it's more about, in today's terms, it's more about who can afford to dig what's left. Okay, with having 40% of the gold still left in Africa, I think it's about who owns the smelters, who has the effective rail lines, who's got the trading hubs that can turn that rock into revenue. So I think it's a game of who is fast on their fingers, okay, to dig that gold efficiently, grab it, and turn it into proper revenue. The bottom line is plenty of gold remains in African ground. Unlocking it on African terms will depend on so many things. It will depend on capital. It will depend on technology. It will depend on consistent policy. So it's more than on the ghosts of what colonial powers already took. So I think African leaders and the narrative for the people, us, we need to change this narrative and to start thinking along the lines that we need to push more. We need to make sure that whatever it is, we push more into digging more gold and putting things in place and doing it more efficiently than dwelling on the fact that our gold was taken. Now, the problem of dwelling on the old and tired, bring back our gold narrative. The problem with that is that it not only hinders our foresight to do better and find meaningful ways to extract this gold using today's advanced methods, like our brothers and sisters are doing in China, Australia, Russia, Canada, and the United States. They're finding better ways each and every day, okay? Now, we do thank Trive Masiyiwa, the Zimbabwean billionaire that is at the forefront of making sure that AI plays a big role in shaping Africa's future. And we hope that AI is going to be one of those technologies that will shape the mining sector as well. This is our time in Africa. We don't need anyone's blessing to change that. If only we could smelt the bars here in Africa, if we can stamp our own hallmark on them, spend the profits on lights, clinics, Wi-Fi, whatever lifts the next generation higher than we stand now, this is what we need. If gold can underwrite skyscrapers in Toronto, and the subway lines in Beijing, we've seen how China has become developed right in our own very eyes. There are motorways in the mountains. You've got rail lines in the mountains. You've got beautiful wonders in China. All that is being built because of the gold, because of the resources that they have. So if we have all this gold within Africa, why can't we use it to wire electricity to every African school? If Africa kept more of its gold wealth, why couldn't that money pay for world-class healthcare programs, clean roads, railway systems, institutions? We don't need anyone's blessing to change that. Thanks for watching today, and we'll see you in the next episode.